In this message, I want to talk about the power of love in relationships. We've been saying that the Bible doesn't spend a whole lot of time on the resurrection part of the Easter story. It's almost understated. It was predicted, it happened. No editorializing, no spin, no hype. The text just says, matter of fact, the tomb is empty, he is not here, he is risen. But what the Bible does explain in great detail are the events immediately following the resurrection. There is one more mission for Jesus to accomplish. He wants to convince his followers that he is alive and well. And he's looking for three people. Three people. Mary, his mother in her grief that he meets outside the tomb. Thomas in his doubt that he allows to touch the wounds in his hand and his side, and Peter in his failure. That's why John adds a final chapter to his gospel. He wants to tie up a big loose end. Question: what happened to Peter? So we read in John 21:15 these words. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Now, I want us to note several phrases in this passage. The first one is, "Do you love me?" As you'll recall, after the arrest and the trial of Jesus, Jesus was passing in the courtyard between the palace of the high priest Pilate to Caiaphas. And in the dark, hiding in the shadows, was Peter. There was an anthrakion, a charcoal fire, that shed some light on those gathered around that fire that evening. And there is Peter, and it only took a common servant girl in the cold, in the dark, for him to deny Jesus. "I never knew him." Never. Nope, don't know who you're talking about. And then, as Jesus is crossing the courtyard, his lips are swollen, his face is covered with spit, their eyes meet. And when they do, Peter is devastated with guilt and pain. And then the rooster crows, and Peter feels like he's been hit with a sledgehammer. He went and he wept bitterly. Well, about a week later, they met on the shore of Lake Galilee, where the ministry of Jesus began and where he first called his apostles, his disciples, 3 years earlier. They're in the same place, the same boat, and the same result as these men are out fishing. They had caught nothing. On the shore, Jesus is cooking some bread and some fish on an anthrakion, a charcoal fire. That word is used only 2 times in the New Testament, in John 18, when Peter denies Jesus, and in John 21, right here, where Jesus is cooking. And Jesus said, "Come, have breakfast with me." And he took bread, and he gave them the bread, and he gave them fish. He's saying, let me feed you, let me serve you, let me fill you. It reminds me of that passage in Ezekiel where God says, "Eat this scroll." And so I took it and I ate it and I inwardly digested it, and it filled my stomach and it tasted sweet as honey. Well, here Jesus is providing again something for them to eat. But what's interesting is during this breakfast, they eat in silence. They're all failures. There's nothing they can say. There's no one that wants to bring up any topic whatsoever, including the weather or the fish. And Jesus is silent as well. When they're finished eating, they wonder, will he say something? What will he say? I mean, will it be like, "You dirtbags, you literally left me hanging on a cross"? Is Jesus going to say something? And if so, what is it that he would say? Well, here it is. He doesn't address all of them. He turns and he looks into the eyes, like he did on that night in the courtyard, into the eyes of Peter. And he says to him, Simon, son of John. Jesus uses his old name, the name before they ever met, his fallen name. Now, Peter knew he was alive. He had seen him 2 times, but they had not spoken. Jesus had been silent in terms of their relationship. It was unresolved. And so the question is, where does Peter stand with Jesus? And so Jesus said to him, question, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? That's a big question. There are 3 words that Jesus could have used there: eros, a romantic love; philos, a brotherly love; and affection, Philadelphia. But he uses agape, the highest level of love. Pure love. Love in its fullest sense. In the Hebrew, it's chesed, the steadfast love of God, the limitless love of God, the full grace of God on my life. And that's the word that Jesus asks him here. Peter, do you love me? There's a second thing that Jesus says to Peter. Peter, do you love me more than these? Now, he's not referring to the men, the fishermen. They had all failed him. He's asking him, do you love me more than all the things of your former life? The nets, the boat, the fish. Are you prepared to give all of this up for me? Are you prepared, Peter, to walk away from your former life and live for me? That's a good question, isn't it? It's a big question. How much do you love me? Jesus realizes that love is the driving force of life, that we were created to thrive in love and intimacy with God and with each other. He also knows that love can be dangerous. The more we love someone, the more we give away power in our lives, the easier it is to be hurt or betrayed or destroyed or even devastated. Conversely, love can build us up and fill us with a new power. As you'll recall, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13 that of faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love. He's using the word agape there, the highest form of love. You know, when I do weddings, there's a moment in the wedding where I have the bride and the groom turn and face me, and I ask them this question. I say to the groom first, I say, do you love her? Do you realize that you're not going to be first anymore in your life? She is. It's the concept of sacrificial love, of my life for yours. And I ask the bride, do you love him? Are you prepared to say you're not going to be first anymore in your life? He is. That concept of sacrificial love. Now, up until that moment, they're standing there all googly-eyed, and isn't this wonderful? But they are hit with the reality that real love, agape love, is a sacrificial love. And if you don't have that love, if you put yourself first in a marriage, you begin to lose that love. You begin to lose that relationship. So it's no surprise that Jesus asks only one question. Do you love me more than all of this? He's asking him, am I first in your life? Do you understand sacrificial love? Jesus used the word agape, but Peter answers with philos. He drops things down a level. I mean, I thought I loved you with agape love, but I can't say agape any longer, the highest level, because I didn't measure up. I failed you. My love is not what it should be for you. And then Jesus responded, well, yeah, you're right, Peter. I mean, what happened to you? He doesn't say that. He said, feed my lambs, my little ones, my children. I will be leaving, and I am going to turn over the mission and the gospel and the church and this band of failures to you. I want you to lead them. So there's only one question you need to answer. Do you love me? Because if you do, all else will fall into place. The only question you really need to know is, do you love me? Do you? That's a big question. The one question we all have to answer is, do you love me? Do you? It's a question that Jesus asks all of us. John chapter 21, verse 16, he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, Do you love me? Why does he do that 3 times? Because Peter had denied him 3 times, and Jesus wants to set everything right. He denied him 3 times, all in one night. They have not spoken since then. So now, Jesus wants to get to the heart of the matter. Let me simplify this for you. 2 times more he asks him, Do you love me? With an agape love. Only the 3rd time, he drops down to Peter's level. He asks, Do you philos me? Do you love me at that level, Peter? Do you? And Peter grieved. He was so sad that he had let Jesus down. He'd failed him. He had broken that relationship. Peter says to him, Lord, you know everything about me. You made me. You shaped me. You handcrafted and hand-fashioned me. I'm a unique individual. You know everything about me. You know I love you. But my love was not enough. It was a human love. It was a failure. Now, there's 3 things that I want you to notice about this story. 1, Peter had a public failure. Now he receives a public forgiveness. Sooner or later, all of us know the debilitating power of failure in our lives. Success can tend to puff us up and distort reality and breed pride and independence. It can tend to take God out of the picture. But failure has a way of sifting things out. It teaches lessons we can't learn any other way. It leads to growth and maturity and character and endurance. It's been said the greatest lessons come from the most costly mistakes. Sometimes failure is necessary for transformation to take place in our lives. Our God is not like an angry father standing ready to judge us and condemn us and stand over and above us. He is a loving father, ready to receive and accept us. We don't have to measure up. He's not an exacting father. He is this loving father. He knows my name. I love that song. Before time began, my life was in his hand. Before time began, my life was in his hand. And our understanding of the depth of the love of God for us and of Jesus for us is in direct relation with our understanding of the depth of our failure. The richness of his forgiveness is in direct relationship to the poverty of our brokenness. Peter, of all people, of all disciples, had betrayed Jesus most deeply. And now there's a sense in which he will be forgiven most deeply, most richly, most thoroughly. Now the kicker here is this is not a story of Jesus trying to figure out how much Peter loved him. He had already gotten that figured out. He already knew. He created Peter. What this story is about is Jesus is trying to tell Peter, do you know how much I love you? Peter didn't get forgiven because he loved Jesus. He got forgiven because Jesus loved him. And he loved him in an agape love, the fullest, highest sense. I love you as you are. I died for you the night you betrayed me. I saw you in that courtyard. I loved you in your failure. I gave my life for you. And there's a sense, Peter, in which you don't really know how much I love you until you are loved in your failure. Peter failed in public. He is forgiven in public. He left breakfast that day a new man, a forgiven man. There's a second thing I want us to notice in this story. Peter had failed Jesus publicly, and now Jesus is going to publicly restore him. Public failure, public restoration. The relationship between Peter and the disciples had been broken. Their confidence had been shaken. Peter can't lead us. I mean, we saw him betray you by the words of a mere servant woman. He's no longer our leader. We will fellowship with him, we'll be with him, but he can't lead us. So Jesus knows he needs to be invited not only back into the fellowship, but back into leadership with the disciples. So he says in front of them publicly, I forgive you. You are forgiven. I have restored you. And because I have forgiven you and restored you, they are to forgive and restore you as well. Just as I have. I want them to restore you to a position of leadership and relationship with each other. And they will do that because I have restored that position of leadership and relationship with me. And I'm asking them to follow my lead. I love this concept of public restoration. You know the story of the prodigal son. The father gives him a great gift. He leaves home. He squanders everything that he has. He's living with pigs. Finally, he wants to go home and just be a servant for his father. When he returns home, his father sees him coming in the distance, and he runs out to him and opens his arms and embraces him. Now the community, the family, and his brother, they're thinking, he doesn't deserve this. He threw everything away. He took advantage of this man, of my father. They're wondering, what will the father say to the prodigal son? And what he says is, let's have a party. That which is lost has been found. And if I restore him to what he had previously had in his life and in his relationships, then I challenge all of you to restore him as well. Follow me. The prodigal son was receiving a public restoration by his father, that he loved him and he would never, ever let go of him. That as Paul said in Romans 8:38, nothing that we do can separate us from the love of Christ. He first loved us. Outrageous, you say. It's unbelievable, this concept of restoration. John Wesley called it amazing. Amazing grace. There's public failure, public forgiveness, public failure, public restoration, and finally, public failure, public commissioning. Jesus is saying to Peter, Peter, now that you know who you are, now that you know that you can't measure up no matter what, no matter that you'll say, I'd die for you, I'd go to prison for you, Lord, and then you betray me. Now that you know that you can't measure up in your own strength, and now that you know who I am, that I am the resurrected Jesus, that I can take your pain and your guilt and your hurt and your brokenness, and my agape love will forgive you and transform you. Now you need to know that I can use you. Jesus says to him, in the Greek, it would sound like this: be shepherding my dear sheep, my precious ones, my entire flock, all of them. Keep feeding and nourishing my sheep. And it's important to notice here that when he says feed and tend and feed the lambs of me, that pronoun is critical. They are my lambs, not yours. My sheep, not yours. They don't belong to you. None of this belongs to you. If you love me, you will take care of what belongs to me, my lambs. And he's saying now to Peter, now that you know the depth of your failure, I can use you to watch over my sheep. They're weak, they're vulnerable, they need you. This is the first great apostolic commission. It doesn't take place at the ascension. It takes place right here. Feed, tend, feed. This is your mission. If you love me, minister to my sheep out of your brokenness. And now Peter knows that the greatest lesson of human failure, the most painful lesson, leads to the greatest lesson of understanding the depth and the richness of God's love for him and of his purpose now in life, of his mission, of his calling. So there's public failure, public forgiveness, public failure, public restoration, public failure, public commissioning. Peter's story is your story. It is my story. It is a story of how deep and broad and wide is the love of God for you and me. And Peter's story causes us to ask certain questions about our story, about our lives. Do you believe in God's love and forgiveness? Do you really believe that this moment, how deeply God loves you, that you're the most important thing in the universe to him, that he is preoccupied with you, and he has forgiven you and me of our greatest sins? Do you believe this? Are you a part of a fellowship of forgiven people? I'm not talking about people out there that try to hurt you or betray you or get sideways with you. I'm talking about the fellowship of those who have been forgiven by Jesus and understand the depth of that forgiveness and are willing to pass that forgiveness on to each other. And finally, are we ministering? Are we tending, feeding, caring out of our brokenness? What is your ministry? God's given all of us ministries. It might be hospitality, it might be preaching, it might be giving, it might be encouragement, it might be serving, it might simply be putting your arm around someone, it might be taking someone a meal. Are we ministering out of our brokenness this day? Are we? So Peter's story of God's restoration is our story. Now, in the next message, I want to take us deep into the book of Acts and see how this powerful encounter with Jesus on the shores of Lake Galilee transformed Peter's life into the great leader in the church, a man filled with courage and love. I hope you'll join us.